let's start the webinar. Okay, first of all, let me tell you about myself. So I'm an IT professional, and I worked in various domains like BFSI and power sector. I worked with companies like ICICI and Master. So I'm having more than 17 years of experience in the IT industry. I am an author. I write books. I'm also blogging at our company website. And sometimes I'm also invited for guest lectures at NMIMS and SMTP. So what are we going to look at today? So first thing which we need to understand, why do we need an analysis and design methodology? A brief introduction to OAD, SAD, and the comparison with OAD of SAD. What is the methodology of OAD? UML diagrams, and how UML diagrams help you in implementing OAD or designing and analyzing a system with OAD methodology. So we'll be looking at use cases, sequence diagrams, class diagrams. I will try to keep it as simple as possible and as practical and hands-on as possible. However, the time is 1.5 hours. So we'll see how many things we can cover. The second thing is, as and when you have a question, do ask me. If you are not able to understand, you can also ask me. Okay, so let's start with first understanding who uses OAD. First of all, the business analysts, they use the object-oriented analysis part of the OAD methodology because they are interacting with the customers and they are getting the requirements from them. So they have to convert the requirements, which are business requirements, into the requirements which the technical team can understand and convert it into codes. Technical architects also need this methodology because they have to convert the requirements into a solution. So both these roles actually require OAD understanding. As far as OAD goes, the design is always dependent on a good analysis. So unless the requirements is captured in a proper manner, the solution design, which the architects have to do later, will never be good. So design is an important aspect, but it is dependent on analysis. OAD is just one of the methods for system analysis and design. The traditional method, which has been used for a longer time, is called structured analysis and design, which is SAD. So moving ahead, first thing which we would like to understand, why do we need a structured analysis and design methodology or an object-oriented analysis and design methodology? So software projects actually pose a problem which are associated with understanding of the requirements. Let's try and understand why there is a problem. So let's say, for example, a patient goes to a doctor saying that I am having chest pain, and he explains his problem, whatever he's either sweating or he's just experiencing chest pain. Now, what do you think the doctor will do? Will he just give medication based on what he's hearing from the patient? Or the doctor will again try and ascertain what is the real reason for the problem. So he may ask for certain tests to determine if this chest pain is because of something related to bone, lungs, or accident. Unless it does that, the medication which he can prescribe will never eliminate the root cause. It will just be handling the symptoms. So when the customer is telling you a requirement, they are telling you what they feel is a problem. But actually, that might not be the real problem which they are facing. So Let's look at another example so that we can clarify that. So let's say, for example, you are working with a customer to develop a restaurant management system. Okay. So while you are discussing with the customers, one of the statements which the customer makes is the billing system will levy a VAT of 5% and it can accept charges under $100 if the customer is using a credit card. Can everyone read it? Now, what do you think about the requirements? Do you think the requirements is good enough or some information is missing here? Can somebody answer this question? Yes, correct, Uttam. So, what information do you need? What do you think in this statement? Yeah, correct. We also need order and billing details. But just looking at this statement, what is the next question which you are going to ask the customer? Yes, payment method is one. Of course, here it's mentioning about credit card. That is one payment method. But one of the related questions which can be asked is, it says it can accept charges under $100 by credit card. Now, it does not say anything what happens to charges which are equal to 100 or which are more than $100. What happens to that? So these are natural questions which has to be explored before you can develop a system. Otherwise, the systems will not be able to fulfill all the conditions which might arise because of certain systems. So if some customer is coming to the restaurant and the bill goes beyond $100, then in that case, what are the alternatives? How will the customer pay? So when we are looking at the requirements stated by the customer, there are a lot of questions which are left unanswered, or we don't ask the right questions to get the complete requirements. Because of which, what happens is most of the software projects which are actually undertaken by software companies, they don't succeed. And Standish Group is one of the companies which is conducting surveys across the world for large software projects. And they have been doing it for a long, long time. Every year they conduct it. So one of the reports they published in 2012 is in front of you. If you look at this report, you will see that whether you follow waterfall model or you follow agile model, almost half of the projects are challenged. However, the percentage of failure in agile has come down, but still the number of projects which are challenged is very, very high. What is a challenged project? A project which either is delayed or is over budget. These projects are called challenged projects. So the track record of these software projects have not been very good. Almost half of the projects have been challenged. Now, why most of the projects are challenged? One of the most important aspects, in fact, more than in half of the projects which were challenged, the reason was requirements. Bad requirements were the reasons for most of the projects which were challenged. That means requirements understanding itself is a big problem, and that is one of the primary reasons for projects to fail. So when we are looking at any of the methodologies which is catering to software development, it has to understand and address this issue of not understanding the requirements correctly. Let me know in case something I'm not able to make you understand, or if you are not clear. Okay. So having said that, let's look at what are the different software analysis and design methodologies which are available. So broadly speaking, these are the phases for any software project, no matter what methodology you're following. So there has to be a phase where you gather and understand the requirements, then you document it, then you go ahead and design the system, then you code it, then there is a testing phase, then there is an UAT phase. The verification and validation process is actually not just a phase, but it starts right from the beginning, from the requirement stage itself. Now, there are two primary methodologies which are used for system analysis and design. One is called structured, other one is called object-oriented. So, in terms of difference, the object-oriented systems understand a system in terms of classes or objects and methods. Whereas in structured system, every system is divided into functionality. So the core pillar for structured analysis and design is the functionality or the functions. In object-oriented analysis and design, the core pillar of the methodology is classes and objects. Now, let's look at, from a very high level perspective, what happens in OAD. So, broadly speaking, if we divide the entire phase into three different parts: analysis, design, and construction. Let's try and understand what happens in each one. In the analysis phase, what we are trying to do, we are trying to understand conceptually what does this system is made up of. So, for example, book. Book is a concept. So we start by understanding, okay, there is something in this system which relates to a book. As we go along and get into design, what we do, we start demystifying what is a book. So the book will have certain attributes. The book will have certain methods. So in the design phase, we'll convert this concept into something which is more tangible, which is more physical and logical. Finally, in this phase, we'll also look at the persistent objects, which is nothing but tables. So all this information has to be stored somewhere. So we'll also look at what are the tables associated with these objects. And from the design phase, we'll move into the construction phase, where you will actually implement the book class. If you are into coding, then you can understand classes can be written in different languages. They will have slightly different syntaxes. But essentially, these are the three key aspects of any analysis and design methodology. The analysis phase starts after you get the requirements from the customer. The construction phase is followed by the testing phase and the UAT. So this is a very high level perspective of the object-oriented analysis and design. Now we'll go and get into the detailed understanding of the analysis and design methodology. So one of the OAD methodologies is Rational Unified Process. Okay. So Rational was a company which was later purchased by Oracle. So now Rational is a part of Oracle. So this RUP process is an iterative process. In fact, all the OAD methodologies are iterative. As per RUP, there are 4 phases: inception, elaboration, construction, and transition. In the inception phase, you define the scope of the system. In the elaboration phase, you start developing the design and more analytical models of it. In the construction, you develop the system, that is, you write the code. And finally, you transition. That means you validate and give it to the customer for validation. Now, each of these phases are iterative. So the inception phase can have multiple iterations, elaboration phase can have multiple iterations. So all OAD methodologies will have multiple iterations. But what I'm going to discuss today is something which is based on my experience and something which me and my team have kind of implemented in some of the projects following OAD methodology. So let's try and see what are the different steps. So the first step is to get the customer requirements. Next thing is to understand use cases. Use cases, once you have understood the use cases, then you look at the scenarios. Scenarios can be converted into activity diagrams if required. It's not always that you will create activity diagrams. If you are not familiar with activity diagrams are very similar to flowcharts, which I think most of the people will be familiar with. So once you have identified the scenarios and use cases, you can start identifying the system level or the conceptual level objects and how they are interacting with each other to achieve a particular use case. That we'll be seeing very soon. From there, the system objects which you have already identified, you will create a sequence diagram. And from the sequence diagram, you will move on to create classes that identify their attributes, identify their responsibilities, and how they are collaborating with other classes. If some of the objects and classes are very complicated, you can go ahead and make state transition diagram. Else, you will move into the design phase of the OAD methodology. So once you identify the classes, their attributes, and collaboration with other classes, you can then start adding more details to the classes like multiplicity, dependencies, aggregation, inheritance. All of that will start getting incorporated into class. Then you can develop entity relationship diagrams, schemas, and dictionary. Parallelly, you can work on architectural design, which will identify the various layers of the system, whether it's single, whether it's 3-tier, n-tier, whatever kind of architecture pattern or design pattern you're going to follow. Then you'll go and develop the deployment model, and the team will start writing algorithms, pseudocodes, depending on the scenario and the schedule of the project. If the schedule of the project does not allow you to write all of this, you can squeeze it and then straightway get into code. But having said that, before writing code, it's always useful to at least write some steps on a piece of paper and then start coding. During all of this, we have not discussed the prototypes. Why? Because prototypes are developed at multiple stages, depending on the scenario. It can be done during the requirement development phase itself. Immediately after capturing the requirements, the screens can be developed with or without navigational aid, and that can be used to showcase to the customer what kind of system they are supposed to get. In case the system is pretty complicated, it can also be done when the design is being done, especially after the high-level design phase. So prototypes are used at various stages. So this has been kept separately from the entire process. Any questions on this? All right. Let's start with use case diagrams. So in the OAD methodology, these are the steps where we are currently. Let's start with use cases. So I am sure 100% that everybody, there are some questions. Yeah, so Uttam has a question, how these are feasible on agile methodologies. See, agile methodologies comes with a very different philosophy altogether. Okay. What we are discussing is object-oriented analysis and design methodology. In agile, typically the focus is more on reducing the communication cycle so that your customer is with you. One of the important criteria for agile is that your customer or the product manager or the representative who understands what is to be developed from a business perspective sits with you. All of these methodologies which we are talking about assumes that the customer is not with you. That's why you need all these documentations and models to keep on verifying with the customer that you are going on the right track. If customer is sitting with you, especially in the agile methodology, you don't need anything like that. So all your sprints and the documentations are done in a simple piece of paper, which are called user stories. So in agile, nobody is going to use this kind of detailed documentation. Then the entire perspective or the entire philosophy of agile is defeated. Okay, so we are talking about cases where it's not feasible to have the customer with you or somebody who can immediately validate what you are trying to do. Okay. So now use cases. It's a pretty simple thing. There is an actor and there is a use case. What is a use case? A use case is nothing but something which the user wants to achieve. Okay. This is an example of completed use case diagram. You can see there is a rectangle. Yeah, Roshan, I will just answer this question. Let me go through this use case, then I'll answer your question. Okay, so this is a diagram, which is a completed use case diagram sample. Here you can see that there are actors and there are use cases, and they are connected with each other. The connection represents which actor is going to do what, right? The rectangular box actually represents the scope of this system. Okay, so sometimes you start capturing the requirements without kind of classifying at that moment what is within the scope and what is outside the scope. That analysis is done a little later. So right now, use cases are steps or methodologies to capture requirements as you understand it. In use cases also, there could be multiple iterations. So you start by understanding the broad level use cases, and then you can go on refining it. Now the question is, can financial accounting system be identified and said to be an actor? What do you think? Yeah, Uttam, can you unmute? What you're not able to understand? I'll repeat it.
Yes, sir. The actor things I didn't get it. Can you please repeat it?
Sorry, can you come again? I missed it.
The actor thing. Who will be the actor for the system for the use case? So I didn't get it. Can you please repeat it?
Yeah, sure. So this diagram actually represents the interaction between the actor of a system and the use cases. Use cases are basically the identified goals or the objectives in the system. Now, who are the actors? The actors are supposed to be users of the system, whether end user or system users, who are going to interact with the system in order to achieve this objective For example, generating bill. Whose responsibility is this? Obviously cashier. But who is going to get this bill? The customer. So you can see that in generate bill, on the one side you have cashier, on the other side you have the customer. Now the question was, can a financial accounting system, which is a separate software system, be an actor? What do you think? Okay, Uttam says no. Anybody else? Okay, no problem. Let me go to the next slide, and there we can understand it much better. So maybe in the last slide, I was referring to users, end users, and system users of the system. But users could be a little broader in terms of who can get benefited or who can interact with this system which you are going to develop in order to achieve a particular goal. So a machine or a software system can also be an actor. For example, if you are expected to submit or send the billing information to a financial accounting system like SAP or Tally or something of that sort, even if by it's a CSV file, still that system is using the data which is being generated by yourself. In that case, that is also an actor. However, in this case, it's a consumer of the use case. So anything which is either interacting with the system to generate that information or create that use case, or which is going to get the result of that use case, both these things can be active, except something like a database which is part of this system. Because database will be, if you really consider this rectangular box as the scope of the system, the database is very much part of this whole system. So that is not considered as an actor, because one of the most important criteria is it has to be external to your system. So database is not an external to the system. Now printer is a specific case. If the printer is given an input automatically from your system to generate a report, it is not an actor for the system. But if it is something where you connect and then say print, then it is external to the system. So then it is outside the system, and then it is considered to be an actor. I hope Charan and Uttam, you got the answer for this. Okay, good. So let's move on. There are a lot of detailing involved in creating use case diagrams. Some of things we will just quickly look at it, but there are a lot of things which can happen in use cases. So there is something called include. Include is a simple relationship which shows that one particular use case can include another functionality or another use case. In this case, if you are withdrawing money from an ATM machine, or if you're using your card to withdraw amount from any kind of a system, it by default includes the card identification use case. Because unless your card is a valid card, you cannot withdraw money. So from a system perspective, card identification is a functionality which is part of the withdraw, and that's why it has been identified as include relationship. Similarly, you can have something like extend, which is basically used to indicate specialized cases. For example, in this case, if the order value is greater than 500,000, then you need to have an approval. So in that case, approval is an extension of modify order. So when you're modifying an order where the order value is greater than 500,000, then you need an approval. You also need to look at the direction of the arrows. The direction of arrows are very important. Okay. So in with extend, you can see a reverse arrow, whereas in include, you are seeing a straight arrow. So withdraw includes card identification. So the arrow is in the direction of the card identification. Whereas extend, modify order has a special case of get approval, but get approval is pointing to modify. So these are various UML notations which are used while drawing these diagrams. In use cases, you also have generalization, which is nothing but identifying the parent-child relationship between the use cases. Okay, so these are, we will not spend too much of time on theoretical portions. The one more associated thing is every use case has to be supplemented with a document which is called use case specs. And it identifies a lot of things, which we're going to come to later. So now let's see, how do we identify use cases in any system? If you have a set of requirements and if you have to identify the use case, how will you identify it? So the first and foremost thing which you can do is to identify all the verbs and actions in the document or the text which you're having as requirements. Let's take up a case study and then try to figure out if we can identify the use cases correctly. So let's say there is an airport check-in and security screening system. Okay. This is the requirements, a very brief subset of the requirements. It says that there is a airport check-in and security screening system which has to be designed. So a person who goes into, gets into the airport, he has to screen his baggage, then go to the check-in counter where he can put in the check-in, his luggage. The baggage clerk has to issue the boarding pass, check the baggage if the baggage is within the limits. If not, there can be extra charges. Passengers below 4 years don't have to buy tickets. If there is a special need like wheelchair requirement, there can be a provision. So this is the requirement. Now from this, can you identify the use cases? What are the use cases? Yes, user security check, user ticket validation, correct? Age verification, correct? Okay, so let's see how it can be done. So in this slide, you can see the use cases have been underlined. So just by looking at the actions or the verbs in the requirements document or requirements text, you can simply identify the first level use case. Getting the boarding pass, allowing individuals as well as group of passengers, provision for the special needs, and charges for extra baggage. Right? So these are the simple identification of use cases which have been listed here. Some of them have been listed here. Some of them might not have been listed here, but that does not matter. See, it's all iterative process. So what will happen is, once you identify the first level, then you can again brainstorm and then go and identify more use cases. We'll see how it can be done. So we have identified, let's say, the 6 + 1, 7 use cases. What is the next step is to identify the actors. So from these requirements, yes, baggage check. It can also have wheelchair, that is the special needs. Correct? That's correct, Balaguru. So these are these cases can be identified, and as a next step, you have to identify the actors. So what do you think? Who are the actors? Yes, passenger is an actor. Passenger with special needs can be an actor. Booking clerk is an actor. Security, weighing machine, airport authority. Yes, all of these can be identified as actors. So there is no correct way of identifying things. You can identify whatever you feel like. Then you have to go on and validating each one of them, whether they are the correct actors and within the scope of the system or not. So as you go on and iterate further, you'll start seeing that some of them will start getting out of the system. So there's absolutely nothing if you are able to identify more actors or less actors. Now actors also will have relationship among themselves. So in this case, you can see that the passenger can be an individual or it can be a group. So there is an individual passenger, there is a group of passengers. There could be an individual passenger, which is an individual with special needs. And there is an actor called booking clerk. These are some of the actors we have identified at this stage. Now, let me show you a tool which can be used for creating these kind of UML diagrams. So there are many tools. There is rational product, there is visual paradigm. There are a lot many other products which are available in the market. Okay. Okay. By the way, one mistake which I did is Rational is not bought by Oracle actually. Rational is bought by IBM. Okay. So that's a correction. So yeah. So Uttam, what tool I'm going to show you is actually an open source tool. This is called UML ET. Okay. This is a completely open source. And if you go to umlet.com, you can directly download it. Unfortunately for open source tools, just one second. I hope you are able to see this tool now. So this is the interface for the UML 82. Okay, it's a very simple tool, and if you go to this tool, you can see various types of diagrams which are listed here. All kinds of diagrams. Okay, you can select the diagram which you want to create. Okay, go to this panel and just double click on it. So you have an actor, you have a use case, and then there are various relationships, includes, extends, or simple relationship like this. So from here, you drag it. Sorry. Okay. And then set up the relationship between an actor and a use case. There is a system boundary which you can just drag over it and extend. You can name the system as whatever. In this case, airport check-in. That's it. So it's actually a very, very simple tool to use. Okay. You have a lot of things which are already defined here, already things which are made here. You can just go to different categories of the diagram, just drag here and then rename it. That's it. So here in the use case, I can just write checker. Okay, so this is the way you can make the diagrams. Okay, let me share my PPT again. Okay, so I hope you can see the see my presentation again. Okay, so we have just seen some of the use cases which we have identified along with the actors. Now we can go and identify and explore further in iteration 2. So let's say we pick up one use case, two use cases. One is for individual check-in and one for charging excess baggage, for excess baggage. So in the individual check-in, you can ask a question. What is the criteria for check-in? On what basis the booking clerk will check whether you are a valid passenger or not? So there is a question. Yeah, okay. So how will you identify whether the passenger is correct or not? They just enter the PNR system in their airport system, and that tells that whether this passenger has a valid ticket or not. In case of achieving excess baggage charges, you need to know what is allowed, or the system needs to know what is allowed, and then what is the rate of charging the excess baggage. So if the weight allowed is 20 kgs, if the weight of your baggage is 25 kgs, how much will be the extra charges? If it is more than, let's say, 40 kgs, the rates might go up. It will not be proportionately in the same ratio. It may be little higher for higher weights. So whatever is the rate for charging excess baggage, that has to be determined in the iteration 2. And then you can go ahead and make the diagram. Okay. So let's see how it is. Does it look like in the diagram, in the tool? So this is the diagram which is drawn in the tool. So in the same diagram, we have included the hierarchy of the actors as well as all the use cases with the system. Okay. We have also given the rule. So since you are asking the question, beyond what weight the extra baggage charges will be applicable. So the rule says if the baggage weight is greater than 15 kgs, there will be an extra charge. Okay. So this is how the use case model is prepared. Once you have prepared the use case model, you have to go and identify the scenarios. Okay. So what is a scenario? A scenario is nothing but a possibility of how a particular use case can be achieved. So let's say, for example, we are looking at individual check-in. The actors are passengers and the booking clerk. So in the first instance, if everything goes right, the individual will be able to check in. His baggage weight will be within normal limits. He will get a boarding pass and then he will proceed towards security. But at the time of the check-in, there could be a scenario that the individual has a special need. So that's called an alternative scenario. The third possibility is the baggage weight is greater than the allowed limit. Fourth scenario is valid ID card is not available. Fifth scenario is the passenger can check in using a kiosk. So you can identify various possibilities which can happen in a particular use case. And these are very important in terms of how you proceed further. Now for each of these scenarios, you are expected to write down the steps in which it is going to happen. So in the individual check-in scenario, we have just listed down these 5 to 6 steps. Okay. Like individual puts the baggage for check-in and with check-in and stickers. So this is what happens at the airport. Then he goes to the counter and shows the ticket. the booking clerk enters the PNR number and checks whether the ticket is valid. Then they ask for the ID card. Then the baggage is put on the escalator for the going to the aircraft. Then a boarding pass and the sticker for the baggage is printed. So this is how it works. So similarly, for all the scenarios, you need to identify these steps. Okay. Now, these steps, why these steps are identified? Because it's very important to understand how a particular thing is going to be achieved. And you will see later how these steps are going to be used in our OAD methodology. Okay. So once we have done this, next step would be, if required, we need to draw activity diagrams. Activity diagrams are nothing but very similar to flowcharts. They are created to kind of give a visual representation to business workflows, to understand user behavior, or to understand algorithms. That's how activity diagrams are made. So this is an example of an activity diagram. Okay. So I'm not going to discuss activity diagrams because these are pretty self-explanatory and simple to make. The only thing which you need to know is, in this activity diagram, you can see two boxes and one line which is dividing these two. Here you can see it's written as member, and here it's written as system. So use cases, the activity diagrams also support identifying which of these steps in a use case are performed by which actor. These are called swim lanes. Swimming, coming from swimming, is swim, and then lanes. And these are UML standards. So you can identify in the activity diagrams as well what are the actors who are performing individual tasks in the same activity diagram steps. These are diamond boxes, which are nothing but decision boxes. So, any questions so far? Okay. So, Roshan had asked a question as to how do you decide which methodologies to be used for a new project, right? Was that your question, Roshan? Yeah, Roshan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So now, to answer this question, how will you decide which methodology to be used? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you can go on mute, Roshan.
Okay.
There is a lot of background noise. Yeah. Okay. So now, this is there's no kind of a clear-cut answer that a particular system will only be designed and analyzed using a particular methodology. It's very difficult. Any system, for example, a financial accounting system, that can be designed and developed using structured analysis and methodology. That can also be done using OAD, and that can also be done using Agile, or even the latest methodology, which is called DevOps. Okay, there is no hard and fast definition or applicability from that perspective. However, how it is decided is dependent on 2 to 3 factors. Number one is that look at the resources which you have available at your disposal. So, do you have the customer besides you? Is the situation such that the requirements are not very stable, customers are not very clear? It's going to change dramatically as we go along, because customers themselves, this is kind of a newer product, customers themselves are not very clear about the requirement. So in that case, what will happen? You need to follow something which is very, very iterative. It can be spiral, it can be agile, depending on the availability of the users or not available. So in Spiral, what will you do? You will pick up things which are the most complex or the most risky one. Okay. You will develop that, take it to the customer, and see whether it is as per the requirements. Then you go on expanding that product and go towards completing the whole thing. In case of agile, the primary requirement is your customer should be. The other factor which will come into picture is what is the comfort level of your team and the customers. Sometimes customer can dictate you saying that we want only use case based documentation. Okay. See, they are anyway not going to look into 99.9% of the times. Customer are not going to look at which classes have you made and what kind of class diagrams do you have. For them, the interaction point is use cases, activity diagrams, and maybe sequence diagrams. Okay. So, what is your strength in terms of team? Whether your team knows these kind of methodology or not, or whether customer is comfortable with that. So these are the factors which are primarily going to decide what methodologies you are going to use. But irrespective of what methodologies you are using, even if you are using structure analysis and methodology, please understand in the current scenario, waterfall is not going to work. For anything which is a straight jacketed approach to developing software is not going to work, because customers can't give you the requirements in a very, very structured format and say that, okay, freeze it now. We are not going to give you anything new. That is not going to happen. Okay. So any approach which is structured is not going to work. Which is straightforward is not going to work. So that is always a consideration. It has to be iterated. Okay. So having just to summarize, the first factor which is going to work in kind of deciding for a particular methodology is one, is the customer has any specific requirement. If customer says this is to be done, that is to be done. Second factor, what is the scenario in terms of availability of the resources? Whether customer is closer to you, in that case, agile is a good option. If customer is not with you, is far away, and maybe video conferencing on a regular basis is also not possible, then agile is not an option. Then you are left with maybe OAD and the structured analysis. Okay, so these are some of the considerations which can be used to decide on what could be a methodology for a new project. Does that make sense? Are you able to kind of understand that? All right. Okay, so what we have looked at is, we have looked at use cases, we have looked at activity diagrams. Now the next step is to identify system objects and messages so that we can create sequence diagrams. Now sequence diagrams is a little more involved but a little more detailed diagram. Okay, so it requires identification of objects or entities which are going to interact with each other and achieve the tasks which have been identified in the use case diagrams. Okay, so let's see how does it work. So it is an interaction diagram and it is used to identify and represent behavior. Okay, this is also known as part of dynamic modeling. So use case diagrams are common diagrams which are made for identifying the static behavior, which is another example of static behavior is making of class diagrams. What is dynamic? Where you have interactions amongst various entities. So sequence diagram is an example of dynamic modeling. This is something which looks like a sequence diagram. So there are various timelines which are rectangle boxes like this, and these are called timelines. Okay. Each of the active objects across the timelines interact with other objects like this. And how do they interact? By sending messages from one object to another. Okay. In this case, an analyst object is requesting for available reports from a reporting system as an object. Okay. And then there is a return message which is being sent from the reporting system to the requesting object saying these are the available reports. So this is how sequence diagrams are made. So what we saw was something called as synchronous return message, meaning it is sent back immediately. But there could be scenarios where you will send a request and response will not come immediately, or you don't need to wait for that response to come to proceed further. So requests have been submitted. The object to whom the request has been sent will keep on working on it, and you can proceed on your own tasks. Those kind of messaging are called asynchronous interaction, and they are shown as single half arrows like this. You can see it here in the diagram. Okay. We can also specify the conditions under which one object will interact with the other object. These are called guards or conditions like this. Okay. So here it says that object 1 will interact with object 2 through calculate message only if the value of x is less than 15. Okay. So that is how you can define the interaction messages. Just like in the case of excess baggage, we have already defined a condition, and that can be shown on the sequence diagram. Now let's look at this scenario, because sequence diagrams, so far we have done this much. From here, the sequence diagrams have to be created. So now how do we do that? How do we go about creating sequence diagrams? So there has to be a little bit of work which needs to be done before you can actually start making sequence diagrams. Let's see how it is done. So start with iteration 1. What we'll do, we have already identified these steps. In those steps, let's identify who is interacting with whom and with what kind of messages. So you need to make a table where you will have steps, who is interacting with whom, using what message, are there any preconditions or are there any optional stages, and what is the scope. So let's say first one. The individual puts the baggage for check-in and stickers. Okay. Now, this check-in is basically the first step which happens when you enter the airport. So at that point in time, there is a lot of airports have a separate security check before you go to the check-in counter. Okay. So in that case, who is interacting? The passenger. With whom? In this case, this is an object which is a security system. But since this is not going to happen inside your system, we have just ignored and said not happening. And this is going to be a manual task. After this security check-in, the passenger will go to the check-in counter and show the ticket. Again, in this step, till showing the ticket, the passenger is actually showing to the booking clerk. It should be booking clerk. It's a manual task. Again, this is out of scope because the showing of the ticket is not something which is happening in the system. It's just over the counter. Once the booking clerk gets the ticket, he or she enters the PNR number into the system. Now in this case, there is a booking clerk, and then there is a screen or a search screen where you can enter the PNR details. And what is the message of the function here? By validating the PNR. Right? What is the precondition in this case? The precondition in this case is the booking clerk must be logged into the system. Right? Unless the booking clerk is logged into the system, the booking clerk can't enter into the system or can't validate the PNR. Next step is booking clerk will ask for the ID card and verifies. So the booking clerk will ask the passenger for the ID card. He or she will verify it. Again, this is a manual process, so it is out of this scope. Okay. So this way, what we can do is we can identify all the steps, who are interacting with whom to achieve what, with the messages or the way it is to be done, and what are out of this scope. So in the iteration 1, we will remove the things which look like out of scope, and also identify the things which are going to interact with each other. Okay. So by doing that, what we are left with is actually these steps with these two preconditions and optional status. What are these preconditions? 1, the booking clerk must be logged in, and 2, the baggage weight is within the allowed limits. Just give me 1 second. Huh? I'll just take 1 second. Okay. So the one was the precondition where booking clerk must be logged into the system, and the second one is an optional check where the baggage weight is checked whether it's within the allowed limits. So that is the iteration 2. Is that clear? Any questions so far? Okay. So now let's move ahead. Now, before we can actually go and draw the sequence diagram, what we now need to do is to look at these steps, these preconditions and optional statements, and include it in the flow, or include it in these steps. So we'll quickly do that like this. So booking clerk must be logged into the system. That is step 1. Who will do it? Booking clerk. With whom it will do it? A screen which is a part of the system which will be called either user master or login master. There is no problems even if you say it user master. you can always come back to this in different iterations and correct. What is the message? Login. Next step was validating the PNR. Third step is checking the baggage weight and how much it is, whether it's higher than the required allowed one or lower than that. So the booking clerk will check with the charge calculator. The charge calculator may be identified as one object, which looks at the weight of the object or weight of the baggage and calculates the charges. So once there is an exit charge, the payment has to be received. So when you are logically start looking at these steps, you will come to know that, okay, the payment also has to be received. In that case, the booking clerk will interact with the accounts module of the system to receive it. So now these three steps have been included in the series of steps which we had identified to be part of this code. All right. Now we are going to go and draw the sequence diagram. So now for sequence diagram, we have another tool. Okay. And that tool is again a open source tool. It's an online tool. It's called Web Sequence Diagrams. Okay. Can all of you see this my screen and Web Sequence Diagrams? Okay. Now this is one of the simplest tools possible to create sequence diagram. Why? Because it allows you to write the entire sequence in the form of steps. And these steps are very, very simple to use. So let's start looking at this. There is a title called individual check-in. If I modify it, it gets modified online. Can you see this? Yeah. So this is a very, very interactive tool. It provides you a lot of objects which are already created. Okay. So now let's look at our scenario and go back to our steps. First step is booking clerk must be logged into the system. So booking clerk interacts with user master or login master through a message called login. What can we do? We can say here booking clerk interacts with, let's say, login master. Right? You can see that this is booking clerk, this is login master. And what is the message? Login. Now these are parameters and arguments. If you want to specify, if you feel it is available to you and you want to include that detail, you can simply say user ID, comma. You can see that here. Right? So from one object to another object, we have created a messaging system. Now, one of the important things to understand in sequence diagrams is the question. So is that sequence diagram tells you the sequence in which, why it is called sequence diagram? Because it tells you the sequence in which things are going to get done in the system to achieve a particular task. In this case, it's called individual check-in. Okay, so that's very important. So that's why you can see there is a numbering system which is already there. So you have to follow that numbering system. What was our next step? The booking clerk enters the PNR number and verifies it. So in this case, next step would be, I'll enter this. I'll simply copy and paste. So booking clerk will interact with search PNR. Okay, I can, at this stage, I can say, okay, I know that there has to be a search screen with which the booking clerk will interact to get the PNR validation. Okay, so I will name it as search PNR. You can name it anything which you would like. And what is the message? Validate PNR. PNR. So now you can see the message appeared here, and that is the second in sequence. And what parameter we will pass? There will be a PNR number. Right? Hello.
Show you what can happen. It's a very basic application.
Okay. Yes, Uttam. You are saying, is there any way to show booking clerk logged in and is in active state? Yeah. These are, see, these are all active states. These are the timelines. So this vertical line, the original, I will show you another format of sequence diagram where you will see that how the systems are identified to be having active state or inactive state. Okay. Look at this. This is the sequence diagram which is made in UML ET. This particular rectangular box, can you see this? This particular box, I will show you with arrow. This thing is known as timeline. And for the period for which this timeline is visible, that means this object is active. Okay. And if you want to show that this object is destroyed, you can show something like this. See, there is a tool, there's a way to show that product is destroyed. Okay. So I can say after this, destroy. Okay, so you can see that there is a cross which comes into picture. It shows that now this object is not active. Okay, so timelines are basically you have all the representations for showing something active, showing something not active. So different tools will have different methodologies. Okay, so now we have a login message, we have a validate PNR method, and this way you can go on creating different messages between one object and the other object. Okay. Now, one special thing which I wanted to show you in the diagram is something which helps you in depicting the optional conditions or something which is a special case. In this case, what is a special case? Is the baggage check. So in this case, we have something called optional blocks. So you can see here on the left, you can see alternatives, optionals, loops. There's so many different representations for different conditions. So there's an alternative for showing if and else and nested if and else. There's an optional only if there is a certain condition which is met, then only this condition is followed. And loops and so on and so forth. There are a lot of such structures available if you go down. So in this case, what is the option? Baggage weight is greater than 15 kg. Okay, so if the baggage weight is more than 15 kgs, then what is supposed to happen? Then the booking clerk has to ask the charge calculator. We have named it as charge calculator. For what? By saying calculate charge, and the argument will be baggage weight. Okay. So in this case, what is happening? If the baggage weight is more than 15 kg, then only this part of the sequence diagram will be executed. That's why it is shown under optional. Anything which is outside optional and in the normal flow, they are supposed to be mandatory messages. They have to be followed. Optional is something which is optional. Okay. So in this case, the booking clerk is requesting the charge calculator to calculate the charge. Now, how will you show the return message? In this case, when the charge is calculated, then the charge calculator will say to the booking clerk, this is just a value. So charge calculator will return to booking clerk what is the charge amount. Is that clear? Okay. So you can use the same interface to create any kind of sequence diagram, and then you can export this to an image. Okay. So PDF and SVG are not available in the free version, but .png and text file is available for export, even in free version. Okay. So this is a very simple and handy tool, and as long as you are able to represent what you intend to in the sequence diagram, your purpose is resolved. You don't need to be creating the sequence diagram to the minutest of details. The idea is to just model this correctly. Okay. So this is the way in which we can go on and create sequence diagrams. Okay. So we will take up class diagrams as well. Okay. So once you have made the sequence diagrams, the next step could be to go ahead and create class diagrams, and you will use the information which has been created in the sequence diagrams to create class diagrams. So this is possibly the second last or the last step in the OAD process. Okay. State transition diagrams are very, very optional, and they are only created in case a particular class and object has a very, very complex behavior. Otherwise, they are not developed. You can do with use cases, activity diagrams, and sequence diagrams and classes. This is the way class diagrams are represented. So at the top of it, you can show the name of the class. Then there is an attribute which has the variable name and the type of the variable. Then you have methods and the return types, which are these. These are the return types. Okay, and these are the names of the methods. This is a very simple way of representing classes. There are a lot of things associated with classes: generalization, association, multiplicity, aggregation. All of you might be knowing classes have a lot of properties. Now, let's see how do we identify classes. We have seen this. This is the last we developed for creating sequence diagrams. Now, this is the basis for identifying classes. Okay. So you have who, you have with whom, and you have messages. Right? So does it sound very familiar for classes? It does. So let's do this. We remove these steps so that we can use the same table for identifying classes. So this is what we have done. So who becomes one class, collaborating with becomes another class with whom these classes are collaborating, and what are the key responsibilities here, which has already been identified in the previous step. Now we will go on developing this further so that we can identify more details about each of the classes. Okay, so Let's start doing that. So now booking clerk was interacting with login master. Why? For logging in. What is the scope? You can define the scope. It's public, private, protected, whatever you want to. If you want to, if you are familiar with this, you can do that. If you don't, in case you are a business analyst, you're working as a business analyst, you may not be aware of these things. So you can remove these details. It's up to you. What is the parent? The login master will definitely inherit from user master. Okay. So what are the other details? You'll start identifying the attributes now. Okay. How will you identify the attributes? There could be multiple sources. One source is the understanding of the domain in which you're working, or you're just using common sense because you know how people log in, how people What is your question, Uttam? I'm not able to understand. Access specifier to?
Means you were saying about class diagram. So on that we were able to represent attributes and responsibility.
Huh.
But what about that scope? You haven't mentioned it. That's why.
Achha, okay. No. So scope is something like if you are familiar with and if you can identify the scope at this stage, okay, you can do it. Okay. If you're not familiar with this, you can leave it. Now the question is, how do you identify the scope at this stage?
No. How to represent? How to represent on class diagram?
Achha, how to represent on the class diagram? Yeah, just
Yeah. Go back the previous slide. Not this one. The class diagram. Here itself and the previous one on the class.
Yeah, so there are plus and minus signs. Yeah. So in the attribute section, here and here, you have plus and minus signs.
Okay.
So plus signs will say it's a public, minus sign it will say it's a private class. Or private attribute or public attribute. Protected, I don't remember. You'll have to check the UML specification. They have indications for all of that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So we are discussing how do you identify attributes. So there could be 2-3 things which you can look at. One is that your understanding of the system. So some of the things everybody knows nowadays, that a login screen will have forgot password, reset passwords, and so on. Second thing could be the domain knowledge, the functionality understanding of the system. Number 3 could be, you might have already, somebody is unmuted. Can you please mute yourself? Yeah. So the other thing which could be used to identify the attributes is prototypes, or if you identify the screens, whatever format you have used for prototyping. It's a simple paper sketch. It could be an HTML screens. It could be some ASPX files. Whatever you have used to create those kind of sketches to understand the screens, that can very well be used for identifying the attributes. Okay. So now, in case of login master, what are the attributes? These are the attributes for a login master, right? These are, they may not be sufficient, they may not be the correct ones, but this is just for example, okay? So you can start identifying the attributes for different classes. So for booking clerk, for login master, for user master, we can identify the attributes. Okay. One of the important attributes in the user master would be a role, because a booking clerk is a type of user master, which we have already identified. Now let's see how it is going to be represented. So here we can have all the attributes and possible data types. Now again, I keep on saying this is that it is not possible for you to identify everything in one iteration. There will be several iterations. What happens in a typical scenario? If it's a very small system, then you might have 1 or 2 people, and then you have to brainstorm and do everything. But in any reasonable size projects, you'll have few people to discuss and brainstorm, and then iterate through this entire cycle to arrive at the correct picture or the correct attributes, correct data types, correct methods, and correct specifications. Okay, you can start with a particular baseline and then you keep on refining. For the user master, there could be add user, delete user, set role, these kind of methods. Now the user master will interact with login master to create credentials. It is possible that when a user is being created by the administrator, the login credentials for that user are created automatically by a trigger. How it is going to be implemented, I just mentioned trigger, but it could be different mechanisms to do that. But the user master will definitely be responsible for creating the credentials for that particular user. And how do we show the inheritance? Booking clerk is a child of user master. Okay, because booking clerk is a type of user master. All right. So from looking at the requirements, we have gone on to create use cases. Then we have gone on to create, look at the activity diagrams. Then identified objects, how they interact with each other. And then we created a sequence diagram using some tools. And then finally, we have identified the classes. Okay. So at this stage, the next steps would be something which we can't cover today. It's already 12:34. So, but I'll tell you what are the next steps which happens, and that is not very difficult to understand. So from here, what people do is they will start getting from the classes, they will start creating persistent objects, something which is going to get into database. Which are the classes which are going to be persistent? So you start creating tables, use the normalization, denormalization, write procedures, write functions. In the parallel, the architecture is decided. It's a what kind of architecture? It's a SOA. It's a different kind of an architecture, NTR, whatever architecture is suited for this particular system, that has to be decided. Then, if you're going to follow some design patterns, that can also be used. And if the user interfaces have not been created in the form of prototypes, they can also get created in the parallel. But the most important part which comes is when you are creating reports, okay, you should always validate the input screens with the reports, because ultimately reports is something which is very important for the system. Reports is something which is seen by the end users, maybe the senior executives, the chairman or the managing director. And that is the purpose of the system, why a system is being developed. So unless you look at the reports as to what are the constituents or part of the reports, and if you don't validate if those attributes or data is not being captured in the user interface, the whole purpose of the system will get defeated. Okay, so that's one of the mistakes which a lot of times I have seen people making. Always look at the reports while designing the system, and then cross-validate your user interfaces. Okay, and then go on and validate and verify. I mean, go on decide how you're going to verify and validate the system. What kind of testing phases you are going to use, whether it's going to be automated, whether it's going to be manual, whatever strategies is feasible, you will adopt that. And if it is required to be test cases to be written there, you start getting the test cases. And finally, also look at what is the deployment strategy, how it is going to be deployed. There are going to be, it's a hosted model, it's a software as a service. It's a cloud-based. Whatever is the deployment strategy, that also has to be decided along the when we are doing the object-oriented analysis. Okay, so that is it from my side. You can ask whatever questions you would like. Okay, two questions here. Uttam has asked a question: what is collaboration? Collaboration is how two things interact with each other. That's called collaboration. So if you have to do something, you have to collaborate with each other. Okay. So if one class, let's say for example, we are talking about login. How will somebody be able to log in into the system? So there is one part of the process is your login screen where you enter the user ID and password and they say login. This information is sent to a particular method of a class which will take this user ID and password to a database, to a table called login master, and from there it will validate and get back to you saying whether your user ID and password is valid or not. Okay, so this is how two objects are collaborating with each other. Okay, that's all collaboration. The booking clerk collaborating with login master using validate log. That's collaboration. Roshan, your question is architecture and design patterns. See, architecture is a very high level stuff. So what is architecture? What is whether your system is going to be 3-tier architecture, meaning will be a user layer or the front end layer, there will be a business logic layer, there will be a database layer. Okay, all three layers are coded and implemented separately, and then they can be made to work with each other. Whether they are on the same machine or different machine doesn't matter. Okay, it could be entire. The interface layers can also be separated. Nowadays, you have AngularJS and single page architecture which have come into it. A lot of tools which have come into picture. So a lot of logic is getting into the browser end itself. So layers are getting demarcated further. So that is at the architectural level. So you decide what kind of architecture you're going to decide. Design patterns are the way these architectures are going to be implemented. Like singleton is one of the examples of design. Model view architecture, that is the MVC architecture. That is another way of implementing your system. So these are more of a low-level stuff, which are design patterns, how you implement certain things. Architecture is more from a deployment and architecting a system. How many layers are there? How many partitions are going to be? Roshan, did you get that? Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Uttam, the recording of this session will be uploaded on our website. Okay, and you can get it from there. Okay. Via email will be difficult. It will be there on the website. You can get it from there. It will be uploaded very soon. The recording as well as the PPT will all be uploaded on the website. You can get it.